Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn halachos Sukkah, and we'll be learning today, Meres Hashem, Daf Pei Ches Amid Beis. We pick up on the bottom of Pei Ches Amid Aleph in Siman Tav Reish Chaf Tes, all the way on the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Pei Ches Amid Aleph. We left out the words of the Ramah in the parentheses here. So the Mechaber was telling us the requirements of schach, what can be used as schach. And the Mechaber told us here in Sif Aleph that for something to be kosher for use as schach, it has to be tzaimeach min haaretz, it has to be something that grows from the ground, it has to be talush, it has to be removed from the ground, and it has to be something that is einoi mekabel tuma. It has to be something that is not royal lekabel tuma, it's not able to become tameh. Now, the Mechaber also told us yesterday that even something like metal, let's remember that metal is mined from the ground. So you might think that metal could be something, it could be considered something that comes from the ground, and therefore it's right to be schach. The Mechaber told us no, it has to be something that is tzaimeach min ha'adama. It has to grow from the ground. And we saw yesterday in the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Daled, near the bottom of Pei Ches Amid Aleph, where the Mishnah Berurah told us, after Yesoidam gam kein min haaretz, even though the metal actually comes from the ground, it's mined out of the ground, it doesn't matter, it's still not kosher to be schach. And then the Mishnah Berurah said here, Fahu hadin afar mamish, and the same halacha would be true of dirt itself. Dirt is adama, and yet it is not something that could be used for schach, because it is not tzaimeach min ha'adama. And that's why the Ramah says over here on the bottom line of Pei Ches Amid Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, V'chein ein mesachechin ba'afar, you cannot make schach out of dirt. You cannot use dirt to be schach because it is not tzaimeach min ha'adama. And now we turn the page to Pei Ches Amid Beis, and we pick up with Siman Tav Reish Chaf Tes Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, V'chein davar shemekabel tuma, something that can be mekabel tuma, kigoin shpudin, like a spit. Now we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah what kind of spit are we speaking about here. Are we speaking about a wooden spit? Are we speaking about a metal spit? Let's pick up on that in the Mishnah Berurah. But in any case, right now the Mechaber says something that is mekabel tuma, kigoin shpudin, like a spit, va'arukais hamita, or the sideboards of a bed. What are the sideboards of a bed? Well, a bed is typically supported by a headboard, a footboard, and then there are two sideboards that run along the length of the bed, one on each side, and then you either have some kind of beams going back and forth, some kind of strips or fabric strips going from one sideboard to the other sideboard that support your mattress. So if you try to use the sideboards of a bed as schach, they can't be used as schach because they're mekabel tuma, and we'll explain this more in the Mishnah Berurah. V'chal hakelim, or any other kind of kelim, any other kind of utensils. A keli could be mekabel tuma, so it's not kosher for schach. Ein mesachechin bahem, you cannot use these items for schach. Let's break over here and take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Let's say the Mishnah Berurah is cut in hay. Shpudin. So the Mechaber said that you can't use shpudin, you cannot use a spit, a roasting spit, as schach. And the Mishnah Berurah says right away, shpudin shalmatchis, a metal spit. You can't use a metal spit. Aval shel eitz, but a wooden spit, ein mekabel tuma afilu midrabanan. A wooden spit is not mekabel tuma, even tuma derabanan. What is a wooden spit? All it is a wooden pole. A wooden pole is what we call pshute kli eitz. It's a straight keli made out of wood. It's straight. It doesn't have a base kibel. It's not a receptacle. And the halacha is that pshute kli eitz are not mekabel tuma, and they're not mekabel tuma even midrabanan. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah here, if a simple reading of the Mechaber here, when the Mechaber says that you cannot use a shpud, you can't use a roasting spit as schach, we would be tempted to think right away he means shalmatchis, he means a metal spit. Because aval shalates, a wooden spit, what's the problem? Ein mekabel tuma. It's not mekabel tuma. Afilu midrabanan. Kemoi chitzim zecharim desif gimel. Because a wooden roasting spit is similar to a male arrow. And that's something that we're going to discuss in Siv Gimel. So I might as well tell you now, what's a male arrow? What's a female arrow? Well, they would make the shaft of an arrow in two different ways. Let's remember that an arrow has to be comprised of at least two different parts. There's the shaft of the arrow, and then there's the arrowhead. Now, what they used to do was, they made the arrowhead out of metal. They would take a pointy piece of metal, that's your arrowhead. The shaft of the arrow would be made out of wood. Now, there were two ways to make them. You can make what's called a chitzim zecharim. You can make a male shaft. The male shaft is constructed, all it is a straight piece of wood with a pointy end. And then the arrowhead had a little opening where you take the shaft and you push the shaft into the opening on the arrowhead. That's called a male arrow. Those are chitzim zecharim. Now, chitzim zecharim, all it is a straight piece of wood. It doesn't have a base kibel. So that's also pshute kli eitz. And in Siv Gimel, we're going to see that the male arrow shaft is not mekabel tuma because it's pshute kli eitz. So to a wooden roasting spit over here, a nice cut in hay with the Mishnah Berurah, a wooden roasting spit is only a straight piece of wood. It doesn't have a base kibel. It's not mekabel tuma. And continues the Chavetz Chaim, why isn't mekabel tuma? Pshute klei eitz nenu umutar l'sachich behen. It's not mekabel tuma because it's pshute klei eitz, and there seems to be no reason at all why you wouldn't be able to use a wooden roasting spit as schach. Now the Chavetz Chaim comes with a problem, and this is a kasha which is asked by the Magen Avram. V'im kein d'mayri b'shal matris. If it's like I'm telling you here, that when the Mechaber says that you cannot use a shpud, he means a shpud shal matris, he means a metal roasting pole, and the reason you cannot use a metal roasting pole is because it's mekabel tuma. Then asks the Magen Avram, and the Chavetz Chaim brings it down here, hu mishta she'ena tzricha. He says, I don't understand. The Mechaber doesn't have to tell me that I can't use a metal roasting spit because it's mekabel tuma. There's another more basic reason why I can't use a metal roasting pole. I can't use it as schach anyway. Forget the fact that it's mekabel tuma. There's another even more basic reason why I can't use a metal roasting spit as schach. Because it's what we learned in Sif Aleph. It doesn't grow from the ground. We learned yesterday in Sif Aleph that metal cannot be used as schach because it's not tzemeach min ha'adama. Even though it's yesoidoi me'afar, even though it's mined from the ground, still it's not tzemeach min ha'adama. It doesn't grow from the ground. So the Magen Avram's kasha is very simple. The Magen Avram is asking, I don't understand. The Mechaber tells me I can't use a roasting spit. Now, simply, we would think, okay, there's two different types of roasting spits. There's wooden roasting spits and metal roasting spits. Can't be talking about a wooden roasting spit because there's no reason at all why a wooden roasting spit should be possible for schach. It's pshute kli eitz, it's not mekabel tuma, it's wood, it's tzemeach min ha'adama, so there's no reason to passel a wooden roasting spit, so the Mechaber must be talking about a metal roasting spit. But asks the Magen Avram, how could the Mechaber be talking about a metal roasting spit? A metal roasting spit is invalidated as schach for a more basic reason. It's not tzemeach min ha'adama, it's min matches. So the Chavetz Chaim continues, and he says, "V'ha'achronim yishvu kushyasai." He says that the achronim brings this down from the Karban Nesanel, the Machzah Shekel. He says the achronim answer the Magen Avram's kasha, and they answer like this: "The Mayri b'shel eitz." Actually, the Mechaber is talking about a wooden roasting spit, and the Mechaber is passeling a wooden roasting spit. Now, we asked, how could a wooden roasting spit be passel for schach? It's pshute kli eitz, it's not mekabel tuma, and it's tzemeach min ha'adama. So the answer, uberoshe hashpuden yesh ktsas barzel. They would tip the wooden roasting spit with a metal tip. Let's remember that the roasting spit has to be able to be pushed through the meat. So in order to make the roasting spit more usable, they would put a sharp metal tip onto the end of the roasting spit. Ukahai gavna, And in such a case, now, this wooden roasting spit is makabel tumah, because the truth is, when you have a wooden roasting spit that's tipped with a metal tip, that sharp metal tip is very possibly the ikar of the roasting spit. That's a very, very, very basic part of the roasting spit. If you don't have a sharp tip at the end, you can't push it through the meat. So since the metal tip of the roasting spit is so chashiv, the entire roasting spit, even those pshute kliates, with the exception of the tip, is makabel tumah machmas the tip. Achein, however, kevan de ikar aschachu min ashpud shehu shel eitz shehu tzemeach min haaretz. However, since as far as the schach is concerned, the ikar for the schach is the pole itself, which is wood, and it is tzemeach min haaretz. Ve'ein tzarich labarzel l'tzarich haschach. And while I'm telling you that the metal tip of the roasting spit is a very basic piece of the functionality of the spit, and that's why the whole spit is makabel tumah, because of the metal tip, but as far as the schach is concerned, to use it for schach, we don't need the metal tip at all. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, hava amina demutar l'sachich by. I would have thought that it should be kosher for schach. Kamash Malon, so to teach us not that way, the Mechaber comes to tell me the puzzle that this wooden roasting spit is puzzle, Hayelu Makabel Tumah al Yedei Barzel, since ultimately the whole spit is Makabel Tumah because of the metal tip. So a synopsis over here, we have the Mechaber that tells me that a shpud is not kosher for schach. A simple reading, we would think he must mean a metal spit, because we don't see any reason why a wooden spit should be puzzle. The Magen Avram's kasha is, we don't need the Mechaber to tell me that a metal spit is puzzle for schach, because a metal spit is puzzle for schach because it's not semeach min ha'adama. The answer, the Achronim, the Magen Avram's kasha, and they say no. The Mechaber is talking about a wooden spit, and the Mechaber is telling me that a wooden spit is puzzle. Now wait a second, why is a wooden spit puzzle? The answer is, the wooden spit is puzzle because it has a metal tip, and since it has a metal tip, and the metal tip is very choshev, the metal tip is very important for the usability of the spit, the entire spit is makabel tumah because of that metal point. And why does the Mechaber have to teach me this halacha? Because I would have had a serious havamina that maybe the wooden spit, even with the metal tip, is still kosher for schach. Why? Because I would have made the following argument. While it's true that the metal tip of the roasting spit is very choshev when you look at the spit in the context of using it as a roasting spit, because that's the point that allows it to get pushed into the meat, when it comes to the context of schach, when you look at this wooden roasting spit in the context of using it as schach, I don't care if it has the metal tip. I don't need a metal tip to use it as schach. And therefore, maybe we would say that in the context of schach, it's not makabel tumah because of the metal tip. Kamash Malon that no. Since the metal tip is very choshev to its usability as a spit, the entire spit is a davar shemakabel tumah, and since it's a davar shemakabel tumah, it's not usable as schach. Now we go to Mishnah Berurah is cut vav. The Mechaber said that you cannot use aruchais hamita. You can't use the sideboards of a bed as schach. What's the problem with using the sideboards of a bed? Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Vav. Afilu hey Michelle eitz. Even if we're talking about a wooden bed. Okay, so now, a wooden bed itself, that is something which is definitely makabel tumah. A completed bed is definitely makabel tumah, and definitely we know that you cannot use a bed, no matter what size it is, you cannot use a bed as schach. But we're not talking about using a bed as schach. We're talking about using a part of the bed as schach. What part? The sideboard. The wooden sideboard of a bed, I would think, is very usable as schach. What is it? It's pshute kliates. It's a straight piece of wood. It doesn't have a base kibel. And the sideboard of a bed may be very, very narrow. What do you need it for? All it does is it connects the headboard and the footboard, and it supports the straps that go from side to side that support the mattress. So it doesn't have to be very big. So essentially it could be a wooden pole. Why can't a wooden pole be used as schach? So explains the Mishnah Berurah, V'aruchais hamita afilu heim shel eitz, even if it seems to only be a straight piece of wood, pshute klietz, that are not makabel tumah, v'av she'enon mita shlema, and we're not talking about using a complete bed as schach. So again, it seems to be just pshute klietz. It's not makabel tumah. It's tzemeach min ha'adama. I would think it's usable as schach. Still, explains the Chavetz Chaim, psulin l'sichach. It's still possible to be used as schach. While hayil demimita shlema ka'asu, because it came from a completed bed. When we speak about aruchais hamita, that means that this already was a part of a bed. Now I took the bed apart, and I want to use this pole. It's not just a wooden pole, it's aruchais hamita. It came from a bed. So the Chavetz Chaim is telling me, since it was once part of a mita shlema, and a mita shlema is makabel tumah, now even though you took it off of the bed, since at one point it was roy l'kabel tumah, when it was part of a bed, it was roy l'kabel tumah and it was pasal for schach, now even though you removed it from the bed, it still is considered to be something which is pasal for schach. That's what the Chavetz Chaim means here. Since it came from a complete bed, and when it was part of a complete bed, it certainly was pasal for schach. Now, even though it was taken apart, and it's no longer part of a bed, it's still pasal for schach, and this is going to be made even clearer to us going forward. Then the Mechaber told us, v'chol ha-kelim, any type of kelim. You can't use a keli to use for schach. Is cotton zayin. Afilu midi de makabel tumah rak b'derabanan. Even if it's a type of keli, and there are several such types of kelim, even if it's a type of keli which is only makabel tumah mid'rabanan, still you cannot use it for schach. Now let's go back to the Mechaber, second line down. Says the Mechaber, va'afilu im nishbaru, even if you had a keli that broke. So now you want to use shivrei kelim. You want to use broken pieces of kelim as schach. Va'afilu im nishbaru, even if a keli broke, shaloi nishar b'hem shir kabalas tumah. We know that there are kelim that are makabel tumah. For example, those of you who learn Daf Yomi, this Gemara has appeared again and again and again and again. We know that you could have a bowl. A bowl is makabel tumah. If the bowl gets a hole in it of a certain size, at a certain point, the bowl is no longer considered a usable bowl. Once it's not considered a usable bowl anymore, it's no longer makabel tumah. It's not considered a keli anymore. Says the Mechaber over here, va'afilu im nishbaru, even if the kelim broke, and shaloi nisha behem shir kabalas tumah, and they broke to the extent that they're no longer makabel tumah, you still cannot use them for schach. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois katan ches, shaloi nisha behem shir. Still, you can't use them for schach. Why not? Kevan shepam achas hoyu ru'liyin lakabalas tumah. Again, this is the source for the halacha of the ruchais hamita. Since this once upon a time was a keli, and when it was a keli, it was roy lekabel tumah. Now, even though it broke, and it's no longer roy lekabalas tumah, it still cannot be used as schach. Why? Because gazru behen chachamim, this is a gzera that the chachamim made, shaloi l'sachech behen la'olam, that you could never use. Once something was roy lekabalas tumah, now even if it's no longer roy lekabalas tumah, you could never use it for schach. Okay, however, oisan hakelim shafilu b'shleimusan lo yahayu mekabelin tumah ela mid'rabanan. Here the Chavetz Chaim tells us a kula. If you have a keli which even when it was whole, it was only roy lekabalas tumah mid'rabanan, it could only become tameh mid'rabanan im nishbaru. If such a keli breaks, mutar l'sachich behen. So if you have a keli that's only roy lekabalas tumah mid'rabanan, if it breaks, you could use it for schach. But a keli which is a real bona fide keli, which is roy lekabalas tumah mid'araisa, even if it breaks, it could never again be used as schach. Now, this halacha happens to have some very interesting applications, there's a nice footnote here, footnote number 4. It's a very lengthy footnote. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to touch on pieces of it. First, at the beginning of the footnote here, it says, V'tam hapsol l'sachech b'shivrei kelim. What is the reason? Why is this true? That once something was a keli and it was royal l'kabbalas tuma, now you could never use it for schach. Berurah Rambam, it's clear in the Rambam, shehu mishum sheyichashvu anoshim shemuter l'sachech b'shivrei kelim. People are going to make a mistake and they're going to think that you could use broken pieces of a keli sha'adayin mishamshim kikelim, even though they're still usable as a keli. For example, I gave you a case before. You have a bowl. When a bowl gets a hole in it at a certain point, once the hole is a certain size, the bowl is considered a broken keli and it's no longer makabel tumah. But it depends how big the hole is. Like the Gemara tells us, you could have a bowl that you use for liquids. It gets a hole. You're not going to use it for liquids anymore. Maybe now you'll use it for apples. So it's still a keli and it's still makabel tumah. At a certain point, when the hole gets so big that, let's say, you can't even use it for rimonim anymore, you can't even use it to contain pomegranates anymore, now at a certain point it's ois keli, it's not a keli anymore, it's just not usable anymore, and now it's no longer royal kabel tumah. What the Rambam is saying is, we cannot allow you to use a broken keli as schach, because once somebody sees that when a keli breaks, you could use it for schach, they're not going to differentiate and realize that it makes a difference how broken it is. They're going to say, if it's broken, it's kosher as schach. But how about if it's broken and it's still usable as a keli? Then it's royal kabel tumah and it should be possible to be used as schach. So since people are going to make this mistake, the rule that the Chazal made was, we don't care. Even shivrei kelim, even if they're completely broken, you cannot use them anymore as schach. Now, the footnote here continues, how about if somebody was building a sukkah and he was short on schach, so he bedafka took a keli and smashed it in order to use the broken pieces as schach. Kasav Aruch HaShulchan, Aruch HaShulchan writes in such a case, shemuter l'sachech boy. In that case, it would be mutter to use the broken pieces as schach. Kevit shetam apsol l'sachech b'shivrei kelim amavur b'Rambam shach rak b'nishbru me'aleim. He says the Rambam's argument of why you should not be able to use shivrei kelim seems to only apply to kelim that broke by themselves. If a keli broke by themselves, we tell you you're not allowed to use it because people aren't going to differentiate how much it broke. But if you yourself are breaking it in order to use it for schach, obviously this fellow understands that he has to break the keli in order for it to be kosher to be used as schach. So the Rambam's gzeira doesn't seem to apply. And some people agree with this logic of the Aruch HaShulchan, some don't. And at the end of this paragraph, it says over here, "V'chein kasa b'shas haTshuva shevet haLevi shenir she'en lisbach lahakel al divrei Aruch HaShulchan." You shouldn't rely on this Aruch HaShulchan lechatchila. Now, in the next paragraph, he has a very interesting case. V'shivrei kelim she'en nikar shabo mikli shemakabel tumah. How about if you have broken pieces of a keli where nobody could even tell by looking at them that they were once upon a time part of a keli? Kigoin, for example, argez eitz. If you have, let's say, a shelving unit, a wooden shelving unit, sheshavro es eitzav, and you broke it apart. You know, when you have a wooden shelving unit, if you break that shelving unit apart, depending on how much you break it, somebody sees a pile of wood. They can't even tell that it was ever a shelving unit. So they can't even tell that it was ever a keli. It seems to be ois keli completely. It's not a broken keli. It's a stack of matchwood. So could you use that? So kigoin argez eitz sheshivru es eitzav ein nikar sheyuchelik mikli das hagoin Reb Chaim Berlin she'ein l'sachech behem, that you cannot use it. Me'idach, however, das hagoin Reb Shmuel Salant shemuter l'sachech behem. Reb Shmuel Salant held you are allowed to use it, shekevit she'ein nikar shabo mikli, because since no one can even tell that it ever came from a keli, loy pasloi some chachamim l'sichuch. There's no reason why the chachamim would pasel it for schach. Okay, a very interesting conversation over here. Okay, now we go to Sif Gimel in the Shulchan Aruch, 3 lines down. Sichecha bechitzim she'ein lehem beis kibel. If you used the arrow shafts that we spoke about earlier, and you used what we called the chitzim zecharim, the male arrow shafts, those are the ones that are just pointy at the end, and they go into a hole at the base of the arrowhead. So those arrow shafts don't have a base kibel. They're just pshutei klietz. So sichecha bechitzim she'en lehem base kibel. If you're using arrow shafts that do not have a receptacle, they don't have a base kibel, a schach, kshera, they're kosher. Why? Because they're pshutei klietz. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and test. Bechitzim she'en lehem base kibel. If you have these arrow shafts that do not have a receptacle, they're kosher. They're pshutei klietz. Ein mekabel tumah. Because all they are pshutei klietz, they're not makabel tumah, they're perfectly kosher as schach. Ois cut and yud, kshera, they're kosher. However, the Chavetz Chaim gives us a caveat here. V'yemahayu pam achas bebarzel. But if this arrow shaft was at one time attached to a metal arrowhead, psulim, now this arrow shaft is going to be puzzle. And the reason is the same thing that we were discussing until now. Even though the arrowhead has since been removed. Why? When the arrow shaft was attached to the arrowhead, the entire arrow shaft was roy l'kabalas tuma. Why? For the same reason we discussed with the roasting spit. An arrow shaft that's attached to a metal arrowhead, the ikar of the arrow shaft, the ikar of the arrow, is the metal arrowhead. So therefore the entire arrow, including the wooden shaft, which is only pshutei klietz, is makabel tuma. So as long as this wooden arrow shaft was attached to the metal arrowhead, it was makabel tuma because of the metal arrowhead. Now, even though you removed the metal arrowhead, the wooden shaft is still puzzle for schach, because since it was once roy l'kabalas tuma and it was puzzle for schach, it remains puzzle for schach. Nishar shem psul aleim v'chanal b'sif beis, like we saw previously in sif beis. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, konim hanivraim chalulim, reeds that from mishas briasan, the way they were created, the way they grow from the ground, they're hollow. A lot of reeds, you pull them out of the ground, you could blow right through them. The kids like to use them to shoot spitballs and stuff because it's a hollow reed. Is a hollow reed kosher for schach, or do we say that that's considered a keli? The truth is, our bamboo poles are also like that. What are our bamboo poles? They're tubes. They're hollow tubes. Are those kosher? Says the Mishnah Berurah, kanim anivraim chalulim, reeds or bamboo poles that from the time of their creation they're hollow. Afa pisha yeshlen base kibel, even though technically they do have a receptacle, you could pour water into them and that water could be contained in them. Ein makabel and tuma, they're not considered kalim and they're not makabel tuma. Why? Lefi shaloi nasu lekabala, because they were not made to be receptacles. Nobody fashioned them this way so that they should be a receptacle. They grew that way. Lefikach, therefore, mutar l'sachech behem, they are perfectly kosher to be used as schach. V'chein, and similarly, mutar l'sachech b'tzinor, you're allowed to use a wooden pipe as schach. And over here, we're not talking about a bamboo pole that grew that way from the ground. You made a wooden pipe. A wooden pipe is kosher for schach because it's tzemeach min ha'adama. And like the Chavetz Chaim says here, lefi shaloi nasa lekabala. What is a pipe made for? Is a pipe made to contain water? No. A pipe is made to channel water. The purpose of a pipe is to transport water from point A to point B. The purpose of the pipe is not to contain water. It's to transport water. And therefore it's not considered a base kibel, and it's not makabel tuma. Now, if a pipe would have a belly in it, that's a receptacle. That's already something that contains something. Especially sometimes you fashion a pipe intentionally with a belly. Why would you do that? That's a very primitive type of filtration system. Sometimes if you have drinking water flowing through a pipe, you'll make bellies in the pipe so that sediment and pebbles and dirt should fall into those bellies, and then the clean water should keep on flowing. Well, in that case, that's a base kibel. You certainly made it and intended it to be a base kibel. Then it's makabel tumah. But a plain wooden pipe that's just made to channel water, that's pshute klietz. There's no base kibel. It's not makabel tumah. And therefore, technically, you could use it for schach. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'chol kli eitz harochov ktsas. Any type of wooden instrument that has a somewhat significant amount of width to it. V'roy l'haniach alav davar. So that it could be used to hold something on it. Maybe it's a little shelf. Any kind of pshute kli eitz, a wooden keli that you might think is not makabel tumah because it doesn't have a receptacle, but it's wide enough that you could use it to support things on its surface, makabel tumah midrabanan. Those are makabel tumah midrabanan. The dummy lebeis kibel, because they're very similar to a keli that is a base kibel. A keli that has a base kibel is a keli that's made to contain something. Well, this looks like something that was made to support something. So it's similar to a keli that has a base kibel, and therefore it's makabel tumah midrabanan. Ulefizeh, and based on this, says the Mishnah Berurah, ein lahaniach mara umagrefa al hasukah. You should not place a hoe or a shovel on top of a sukkah, because a hoe and a shovel, right, those, they have a wide end that could be used as a base kibel. When I talk about a shovel here, we're talking about a shovel with a straight blade, a flat blade. So not our shovels that are rounded and it's made to contain and to hold dirt. That would certainly be a base kibel. But imagine a shovel that just has a straight blade at the end. That, even though it's not a base kibel, but since it has significant width, it could support something, and it would be makabel tumah midrabanan, and therefore it should not be used as schach. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'ayin b'Berurah Yaakov, he says, take a look at the Berurah Yaakov. The daitoi, it's his opinion, the daitoi noite, the b'shas schach, in a pressing circumstance where you simply don't have enough schach, yesh lahakel l'sakech kishenishbara. You could use this mara umagrefa as schach when it breaks. Why? Since even when the mara or the magrefa were whole, they were only makabel tumah midrabanan because they don't really have a base kibel, and they're only being makabel tumah midrabanan because they could be used to support something. So even though normally we say that you can't be mesachech b'shivrei kelim because once something is a keli and it's roy lekabel tumah, you can't use it as schach even when it's broken. But we already said earlier in the Mishnah Berurah that doesn't apply to something that's only tamei midrabanan. A keli that's only makabel tumah midrabanan, if it breaks, it could be used. Now there's an interesting stira here in the Mishnah Berurah, and that is that in Ois Cotton Ches, back in the first column, the Chavetz Chaim wrote this as a lechatchila. In Ois Cotton Ches, the Mishnah Berurah wrote, Oisan akelim shafilu b'shleimusan lo yoyel mekabel tumah ela midrabanan, kelim that are only mekabel tumah midrabanan, im nishbaru, if they break, mutar l'sachich behen. You're allowed to use them as schach. So over there in Ois Cotton Ches, he says it as lechatchila. Over here in Ois Cotton Yud, he's saying it kind of as a b'di'evet. He's bringing down the Berurah Yaakov, and he's saying a broken mara, a broken magrefa. The Berurah Yaakov is noita to say that if it's broken, you could use it as schach. Why? Because even when it's whole, it's only makabel tumah midrabanan. So over there it was a lechatchila. Over here it's a b'di'evet. There are several different reasons given for the discrepancy over here between Ois Cotton Ches and Ois Cotton Yud. One is it depends why the keli is makabel tumah midrabanan. Over here we're talking about a mara and a magrefa. A mara and a magrefa are considered by the Chazal to be kelim, even though they don't make up the daraisa dika requirements of a keli. They don't have a real base kibel, but the Chazal said it's too similar to a base kibel. It really looks like a keli, and therefore the Chachamim were geyser tumah on them when they're whole. In that case, even when they're broken, it's harder to say that you should use them for schach. Because this is not a case where the Chachamim said that something really shouldn't be tameh, but we're going to make it tameh because somebody might make a mistake. No, it's not because of a chash. It's because this really looks like a keli. And kelim are makabel tumah. So the Chazal extended the ability of a keli to be makabel tumah even to a mara and magrefa, even though they don't really meet the bar of a keli min HaTorah. But since they're so close to being a keli, Chazal said the makabel tumah. Earlier, when the Mishnah Berurah said that this is a din lechatchila, that a keli that's only makabel tumah midrabanan, once it breaks, you could use it as schach. Over there, he's talking about a different type of tumah midrabanan. Over there, he's talking about where the Chazal said that something is royal lekabel tumah midrabanan, because if not, people are going to come to make a mistake. So it's not inherent to the keli. It's not that the Chazal looked at the keli and said, this should be tameh. No, really, this shouldn't be tameh. We're afraid if it's not going to be tameh, people are going to make a mistake. That kind of a derabanan is a more kuladik type of a derabanan. Okay. Now we go to the Mechaber Siv Daled. Sichecha bepishtan. Let's say somebody wanted to use flax as schach. Now, let's just discuss for a minute over here the process, how flax is processed. Linen, flax. This is made from a stalk that grows from the ground. When you want to turn it into textiles, the first thing you have to do is you have to cut down the flax and you have to soak it. After you soak it, you take the stalks and you beat them. When you beat the soaked stalks, they start to break apart. And now you could get out the fibrous interior of the stalk. Then you have to take that fibrous interior and you have to card it and comb it in order to make it into something that you could start to spin into threads. What the Mechaber is telling me over here is, Sichecha bepishtan. If you want to use flax that was already soaked as schach, but it's shaloi nidak v'loi nipatz, but it has not been beaten or it has not been combed. So you have this partially processed flax. To what extent is it processed? Only that it was soaked. Kshera, the Mechaber says this is kosher. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Yud Aleph. Shaloi nidak v'loi nipatz. This is flax that was partially processed. It was not beaten, it was not carded, but it was soaked. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kat Yud Aleph, what the Mechaber wants to say here is, after betchila nashru agevoilin b'mayim, even though the stalks were already soaked in water, so the process of turning these stalks into processed flax has already begun, and therefore you might think that affords the soaked flax the status of a keli, and now it's royal lekabel tumah. Says the Mechaber, no. After betchila nishra gevoilin b'mayim, even though the stalks were already soaked in water, mikamokim, nevertheless, kevan da'adayin lo nidak, since it still has not been beaten, bechlal eitzu, it's still considered wood. It's just a woody thing that grows from the ground, and therefore it's just eitz ba'alma. It's not a keli, it's not makabel tumah, and it's tzameach min ha'adama, so it's kosher as schach. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, Umashma miloshen zeh, from the phraseology of the Mechaber. If you take a look at the Mechaber says, Pishton sheloi nidak, that was not beaten, visheloi nidak viloi nipatz, and it also was not carded or combed. Ksheira, it's kosher, dates ba'amahu, because all it is eitz. Now let's go a little further in the Mechaber. Avol im nidak v'nipatz, but if it was beaten and combed, psula, it's puzzle. So in the beginning of Siv Daled, the phraseology of the Mechaber is sheloi nidak v'loi nipatz. It was not beaten, it was not combed. At the end, it's avol im nidak v'nipatz, but if it was beaten and combed. Now the Mishnah Berurah makes a diak over here. From the phraseology at the beginning of Sif Dalet, it sounds like the imahaya nidak, that if it was beaten, af shaloi nipates, even though it was not combed, puzzle, it should be puzzle. Because what does he say here? He says shaloi nidak, that it was not beaten, viloi nipats, and it was not combed. But if it was nidak, it says both here, shaloi nidak viloi nipats. But if it was nidak, if it was beaten, ooh, now it was soaked and beaten. Now it's already processed flax. Now already it's royal l'kabel tumah. Now you can't use it for schach. Umisoif dvarav, but at the end of Sif Daled, mashma de nidak vini pats peinon. At the end of Sif Daled, where he changed his phraseology and he wrote aval im nidak vini pats. If it was beaten and combed, it's puzzle. It sounds like you need both steps to make it processed flax. So in the beginning of Sif Dalet, it sounds like in order for soaked flax to become processed flax, it needs to be soaked, and then once it's beaten, it's already processed, and now it's already royal l'kabel tumah. But at the end of Sif Dalet, it sounds like you need both steps for it to be considered processed flax. You need to be beaten and combed. Aval nidak l'chud, but if it's only beaten, loy, it's not processed, and it's kosher. V'ayin b'prisha bir agra. So the Chavetz Chaim says, if you take a look at the prisha and you take a look at the bir agra, mashma shemitzadedim lohakel, they look like they want to be makel, and they want to say that in echidami it needs both steps in order to be puzzle. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, the truth is, ein lohakel, you shouldn't be makel af benishru lechud, even if it was only soaked. The Chavetz Chaim says, really, you shouldn't be makel. Once the flax was already soaked, you should be machmer to treat it as processed flax. That's royal l'kabel tumah and is puzzle and schach. Rak b'makam atchak. You should only be makel, even if it was only soaked. Forget about if it was soaked and beaten. You should only be makel b'makam atchak. Ice cotton yud beis psula. The Mechaber said, if the flax was soaked and beaten and combed, then it's puzzle. Now, very interesting. The Mishnah Berurah says here, a nice cut in Yud Beis, why is this partially processed flax puzzle? What's the psul? What's the psul? Says the Mishnah Berurah, midrabanan. It's only puzzle midrabanan. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret over here. Those of you who are learning Daf Yomi may know this already. This is based on a machlokes rishonim. We have a machlokes rishonim on the din of processed pishtan, processed flax. Why is it mekabel tumah? Is it mekabel tumah midaraisa, or is it mekabel tumah only midarabanan? And you can see this alluded to in Sharet Zion Ois Katan Yudalid, where he says that this Mishnah Berurah is going according to the Shita of the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh. They hold that processed flax is only mekabel tumah, is only pasal midarabanan. Because it's not makabel tumah. They hold that even processed flax is not makabel tumah. And since processed flax is not makabel tumah, why is it pasal for schach? It's only pasal for schach midarabanan, and not because it's a keli and it's not makabel tumah, for a different reason. Let's see here a nice cut in your base. Psula midarabanan mipnei she'en. This halach is very negayah to us nowadays. Mipnei she'en tzurasai oimedes olav. The reason why processed flax is puzzle for schach is because it has changed its tzura. The appearance of the flax is different. Umerzi ki'ilu einoi migedulei karka. It no longer looks like something which is tzameach min ha'adama. We know that one of the requirements of schach is it has to be tzameach min ha'adama. These shitas hold that the problem with processed flax is once you soak it, you beat it, you comb it, now you turn it into fibers that look like threads, it no longer looks like gidulei karka. It no longer looks like something that's tzemeach min ha'adama, and therefore it's puzzled to be used as schach midrabanan. Now the reason I say that this is very negayah to us nowadays is because of the mats. We know, and we learned this halacha already yesterday, there's a halacha of maimid. You're not supposed to be maimid your schach. You're not supposed to support your schach using something which itself is puzzle for schach. So like we learned halacha yesterday, if you want to support your schach with metal poles, that's a problem. Metal is puzzle for schach, and now if you want to use it as a limud for the schach, if you want to use it as a support for the schach, that creates a problem. Well, so too over here. If you have a string, it's very nice that this string might be made out of natural fibers, so it's tzemeach min ha'adama, but if it no longer looks like something which is tzemeach min ha'adama, if it looks like processed string, right? Nobody looks at a ball of twine and says that looks like it grew from the ground. So if you took some kind of natural fibers, which are gedulei karka, that tzemeach min ha'adama, and you processed them to the extent where they no longer look like something that grows from the ground, they rather look like something that comes from the hardware aisle, right? They don't look like something which is gedulei karka. Then we have this problem of this Mishnah Berurah here. That's puzzle for schach midrabanan because it's mechzi ki'ilu einay migdulei karka. And if it's puzzle for schach midrabanan, then you shouldn't use it as a limud. So how could you use it to tie your mat together? So this is one of the reasons why some of the mats, if they're using string that looks like string, it doesn't look like gedulei karka, then we have this problem here of the Mishnah Berurah Sif Yud Beis. Now the Mishnah Berurah goes further, and the Mishnah Berurah tells us another reason why this partially processed flax would be pasal midrabanan. Furthermore, kevan deroy l'sitam l'soich karim u'ksasais. It's very nice that this flax is only partially processed, but once it's at the point where there are fibers that could be used to fill up cushions, even if they're not processed yet to the point where they could be spun into thread. But if it's already processed to the point where you could have tufts of fibers that you could use to fill up a cushion, v'az yikablu tuma, and if you did use them to fill up a cushion, it certainly would be makabel tuma. Why would it be makabel tuma? I'll tell you why. Because a pillow is royal makabel tuma. There's a tuma called tumas medris. When it comes to a zav or a zava, if a zav sits on a cushion, that cushion is makabel tuma. So if you have fibers that are already usable to put into a cushion, if you would put them into the cushion, there would be makabel tumas medris. Therefore, the Chazal say, even if you didn't put it into the cushion yet, if it's roy to be put in the cushion, it's already makabel tumah midrabanan, and it's already puzzled to schach. Valkein, therefore, gam bin oirish shivrei gevoilin aninar min apishtan, even the na'oris, the small pieces of broken stalks of the flax, ein misachin by. You can't use them for schach. Because sometimes those broken fibers are also used to fill up cushions. According to these above reasonings that we brought down of why there's a psul here by the partially processed flax, even if we're talking about cotton, the canvas or hemp, she'ein mitamin b'negoyim, where they're not makabel tumah b'negoyim. Tzemer gefen, when it comes to cotton, when it comes to this hemp, they can't be makabel tumas negoyim because only tzemer and pishtan are metame tumas negoyim. They also usually would not be makabel tumah as thread because they didn't typically weave garments out of them. Im nidak v'nipeitz and mesachichin behem. But if you beat them and you card them, you can't use them as schach. Why? Because these above reasons would apply. You could always use their tufts to fill up cushions. Another reason why it's brought down that even partially processed flax should be puzzled to use for schach is once you beat it and once you comb it, it's very close to the next step in the processing, which would be to spin it into threads. And once it's spun into threads, it's definitely makabel tumah. V'yakabel tumah al kei gazr shaloi l'sachich bay. V'levizeh b'tzemer gefen v'canvas to in makabel tumah klal l'shayich ha'gzera v'yesh lahachmer. Okay, we're going to stop over here. I thought we would do sif hey, but not to be. Okay, we'll continue next time with Sif Hey. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Schos of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnasa to all those in need, and we should be zeicha to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meherav Yomeinu.